everyone. I'm Maureen Lowe. I'm the president and founder of FTF and publisher of our online news service, FTF News and FTF Focus. I will also be serving as the host for today's webinar, T+1 to T+0 Ops, the Ultimate Endgame, which is produced by FTF and sponsored by SmartStream Technologies. So, T+1. I think it's safe to say that not a day goes by without hearing about some new piece of information or a new suggestion about what your firm should be doing now to prepare. It might feel like so much is coming at you in so many different directions, which can feel not only overwhelming to think about and process, but then to put everything into motion. With the deadline date just over 7 months away, or 229 days to be exact, there is not a lot of time left to consider so many questions and so many aspects that financial firms must take into consideration, whether you're working for a custodian, a broker, or a buy-side firm. But one thing is clear. The T+1 regulatory requirement presents both IT and operational challenges for all industry participants. So, how do you successfully meet those challenges? When facing a significant change such as this, firms need to take a step back and take a more holistic approach to their T+2 implementation plans and take it even another step further than that and use this opportunity to work toward T+0. Now, some of you might already be thinking, no way, that's impossible. But what if it's easier than you think? What if it's an augmentation of existing systems and not a full IT overhaul? And what if in the end, reaching T+0 will prove to be more cost-effective and a strategic approach for your firm in the long run, not only from an IT perspective, but from an ops perspective? And that's what we're all here to discuss today. Not only will we address the likelihood of the deadline date moving, we know so many of you have been asking and maybe wishing and hoping, how relationships are shifting with your custodian or your broker, lessons learned from China and India on their T+0 and T+1 journeys, but also the how and the why you should be strategic in not only your IT investments, but how you approach operational processes with T+0 as the ultimate endgame. So we have a lot to digest and a lot to cover. We are going to do our best to provide some clarity and put some additional resources in your pocket as you continue on your T+1 or possibly T+0 journey. But before we get to all of that fun, we just want to go over your webinar console a little bit. You'll also see that I have pushed out a polling question for everybody to start answering because we want everybody to be interactive and participating in today's call. We will be sharing all the results with you. But bringing you back to your console, you'll see that you can ask a question at any time. There's a Q&A window open to the left of the slides. We advise that you take the opportunity to ask our panel's questions today. They will not be seen by other attendees, just seen by the presenters, and we will be addressing them throughout the discussion and at the end, time permitting. And you'll also see there's a related content feature where we've uploaded a white paper for you to download before you leave today. While we're waiting just for a few more answers to our polling questions, I want to introduce our esteemed panel today, which is filled with a lot of T+1 gurus here. We have our moderator, Bob Wally. He's the principal for Deloitte. We have Tim Kelly, his director of operations for Driehaus Capital Management. We have Vincent Kilcoyne. He's the EVP for product management and SmartStream. And we have Chris Echomides, the director of transformation for BNY Mellon. So going back to the polling question that we pulled out, if we just want to bring you back to it and make sure that you sent in a response. So far, it looks like very confident is second and somewhat confident is first. So that's pretty good. If you feel the same way, please chime in now. I know there are a lot of you out there right now joining our call, and we'll push the results. Okay, so what do we think about this? Is the panel surprised by the results so far?
I wouldn't say so. That seems about in line with what I would think.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, Bob, I'll pass over to you to get the main discussion going. Bob, I think you, Bob, are you on mute? Little technical difficulty we are having here. Please hang in there with us. Sorry about that. Well, while Bob was going to do, oh yeah, hold on. So sorry. Stay with us. It'll be worth it. We promise. Bob's just going to do a little bit of a refresh. While we're waiting for Bob to come back, does anybody else, Chris or Vincent, do you have any thoughts on the polling results that we had about how the audience feels where they are with T+1 right now?
Well, from my perspective, it's pretty much representative of the conversations that I've been having in the wider community. I think that there will be different levels of concentration across different demographics within that sector. Like, for example, if I look at the buy side versus the sell side, you may get a slightly different perspective, and also depending on the size of the organization. But in general, from what I've seen, you know, obviously there are some people who are broadly unaware of what exactly the impact of T1 is going to be on their business. So so many organizations feel it's BAU. So they think that, okay, it's not going to make any material fundamental difference. So, you know, they're you know, quite comfortable with it. But I think by and large, for those who have looked at the true magnitude of the impact that T+1 will have on their business, when they look at it from a forensic or an atomic level, it's fairly representative.
Yep. Hey, Vincent, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I don't know what happened
That's
there.
okay.
So thank you for jumping in there, Vincent. And we all learn how to sing and dance as we always do in operations, right? So I'll just give a quick sort of level set and table set the situation here, right? We've been at changing the settlement cycle for over 30 years when we moved from 5 to 3. And then in 2017, we moved from T3 to T2. And then back in February 2021, the DTCC put out a white paper about accelerating the settlement, teed up the T1 question. And I think as this entire conversation is about, is this a stepping stone towards T0 and teasing that out? As the industry has really rallied around this over the last few years, we've come to consensus about moving to a T1 settlement date. And for those of you who've been paying very close attention, in February of 2023, the SEC came out with regulatory certainty and approved the rules and changes to the requirement for the movement to a T+1, which will be effective on May 28th, 2024. And I think as Maureen, you opened this up, we're 229 days or so to that journey there, which we will transition. During that transition, please keep in mind that both the US, Canada, as well as Mexico will be transitioning to a T1 date. But through all of this, you know, the industry and trade association, SIFMA and ICI, DTCC have been out ahead of this. Deloitte was engaged to help write a T1 playbook. And we've had numerous workshops, presentations. And I think, Maureen, as you said, many, many firms are out there talking about T1 and really the transition. And as we've seen through really the deep dive work that we've done both in firms and industry level, there is a technology component, a operational and procedural and process component, as well as a really significant behavioral component. If we think back to T3 to T2, a lot of the technical changes were very, very dependent on changes to hard-coded settlement dates that was in the software, in data and other various functions. In the move to T1, since all those changes have been made, that really what we're looking at are some technology changes, but they're fundamentally around workflow, coordination, better matching on data than they are on sort of hard-coded functionality. The majority of the change that we see taking place in T1 is around the processes, the coordination of the processes, and the behavioral changes. In today's world, when a day ends on T0, we have over 19 hours to get affirmations and allocations into your executing brokers, of which then DTCC or other settlement venues are processing those changes, and errors and or impacts come out the afternoon and into T2, of which basically firms are scrambling and sending emails and calling their counterparties to resolve issues. In tomorrow's world, that all changes. We move from 11 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, in which we require allocations to be in. And the rule is implicating and defining a 9 o'clock deadline for affirmations to be made. So fundamentally, we move from 19 hours to 5 hours, as you can imagine, not just your firm and your operational staffs, but that of your counterparties, if you will, the buy side and sell side firms. Sell side firms would be notifying and looking for those settlement and settlement instructions, allocations to be in on by 7 o'clock on T, and affirmations to be made by T1, by 9 o'clock, so that things will process overnight. The other major significant change is the changes to the nightly batch cycles, where these deadlines will need to now coordinate with the DTCC batch cycles and job times, and firms will need to make those adjustments. I think one of the biggest things that we need to worry about is the resiliency in those changes, where today you've got a 4-hour return to operations should you have an outage. Tomorrow, even 2 hours will be a significant impact. So I think we're just trying to highlight some of the significant changes, perhaps where some technology enablement can come into play, but most importantly, the behavioral changes that are going to impact all of us. So with that, I think it's worthwhile sort of moving on to and opening up the discussion for my esteemed panelists here. So if we think about T1 push is shaping up to be the greatest battle to eliminate silos. How can these silos transition to a more interconnected information supply chain? And maybe, Vincent, you could take the lead on this and start to open up what are those challenges, and others can chime in.
Sure, wonderful. Well, I love questions that I fundamentally disagree with, all right? Because there's a little nuance to this question that I think, attracts a certain degree of curiosity and confusion. And that is the part, how can silos transition? I don't necessarily think that the silos themselves will transition, all right? And why am I saying this? Well, by way of background, I work in an organization that specializes in post-trade solutions. We've been doing this for probably 30 odd years for approximately 1,000 financial services institutions all around the world. And we've seen, and we have been part of the enablement of the transition. But what we have invariably found, and this dovetails directly with what you said, Bob, in relation to hard coding, that you cannot coexist, all right? That cannot coexist with a flexible behavioral organization, all right? So what we have found is that the silos continue to exist. And I think it would be naive to say that the silos will disappear. I think the challenge is to actually liberate the connectivity and the data and the information that is held within those silos, to actually take that data and turn it into actionable intelligence, all right? And to then drive it forward into actual operations. So the challenge, I don't think, is to eliminate the silos. The challenge is actually to take the data as it exists in those silos, supercharge it by connecting it with data from other silos, so that you now make it possible for the users who have traditionally operated and relied on the data in their silos to now start behaving and operating in a very different way. So the future is going to be around the speed with which you can get the data into the silos, because they will continue to exist, the speed with which you can actually connect that data in one silo with the data in another silo to actually provide operations with better outcomes, better intelligence, et cetera, all right? But then also to make sure that the quality of the data that you are getting into those silos is fundamentally more reliable. So it's about driving confident decision-making, regardless of whether you're in silos or not. It's an API and connectivity, and then driving the workflow based on data in the different silos, rather than having a workflow that is tied to a silo. It is stepping away, being more holistic, and actually being able to combine the data, the intelligence, and the operations of those silos. So that's my perspective. You're back on mute again, Bob.
Thank you. Very good. We have another polling question, and then we'll open it up to the panelists to chime in there, Vincent. So what do you see as the weakest link in reaching T+1 and or T0? Is it the FX transactions, the securities lending businesses, counterparties, custodians, internal IT, and operations?
Yep, thanks, Bob. We have the results coming in real time so far. FX is number one answer, 50%. And considering some of the questions that we have received already on this discussion, FX is very much top of mind for our audience. So if you'll just take a moment to respond, we have over 400 people registered for this webinar. Everybody is located all over the world. So, it just shifted quite. So now we're at FX at 27.5%, which is actually tied with counterparties, and then followed by securities lending. So we'll just give it another minute or so, and then we will push the results. Okay. Doesn't seem to be shifting too much, but a little bit at the end there, with FX still as the top answer at 33.3%, followed by counterparties at 26.7%.
So what do our panelists think about that?
I think from my perspective, just chiming in, that's definitely something that a lot of firms have been interested in, especially, I would say, they're both going to go hand in hand between FX and counterparties, kind of who's going to be awake when, how do you go ahead and get things done when, other firms may not be staffed for, let's say, 24/7 operations, and how do you fund trades when you're executing these transactions from outside the U.S. The mismatch between kind of security settlement in North America and kind of the standard kind of FX spot settlement is something that's of major concern to firms. And so I think it's up to each firm to go ahead and kind of, I'll probably say this a few times today, understand their own business, understand kind of what the risk appetite is, and essentially act accordingly. Whether it's building new relationships, whether it is looking to go ahead and kind of open offices in other locations to deal with some of the stuff. There are a number of different ways to go ahead and kind of tackle this, and I just think it's paramount on every firm. And I think one of the reasons that I think this webinar and a lot of this education is so vital. The issues that exist kind of within North America can mostly be, I think, handled. International kind of players are probably at a bit more of a disadvantage, I think, in this case than they were at previous changes.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with a lot of that as well. And one thing I would say about the poll is it's T+1 and T+0 really are two different, you'd have different answers. When we're talking T+1, and we will talk about T+0 later with other questions, and also Chris brought up a great point about the international markets, for example, like the effect that trading in India has on US. You're going to have these same issues in international countries dealing now with US being a shorter period. But I would have to say with the counterparties, a lot of the stuff that Bob stated at the beginning with the hours difference, 17 to 9 or 9 to 6, coming from the buy side, we're an international trading shop. We're about 15 billion assets under management. We do close to anywhere from 50,000 to 85,000 trades a year. Right now, we are affirming every single one of our U.S. trades and Canadian trades between 3 o'clock and 3:30 p.m. So nothing's going to really change for us. It's the counterparties. They're having less time to deal with what we're providing them. I think during one of our prep calls, Chris said it calls for a lot of kumbaya. We need to, it's not the finger pointing and you need to, you're doing this and you're doing that. We need to understand on the buy side that I think the heavy lifting is all being put on the brokers and on the custodians, because their time is what's really being cut short. If you're running an efficient shop, you're doing your matching. The way you really, what is the most efficient way is the market closes at 3 o'clock. You start using your CTM, your alert, your different tools to get that stuff matched as soon as possible, as soon as the market's over. For us, none of that's going to change on May 20. I should know the date off the top of my head, but
come on,
May 28th. That's not going to change for us. The time shortening is going to be on the counterparties. So we need to do everything possible to assist our counterparties, because that's what they are. They're not the enemies. They're not the people we get angry and mad at. We got to work together for it.
And I'll just qualify one thing Tim said. Tim's in Chicago, I believe, so 3 o'clock is his central time for market.
Very
close.
good. Good point.
Yeah.
We get very angry about this whole second city thing, so we try to forget about everybody else.
Maybe just to chime in on top of that, Tim, I think it's really worthwhile what you're highlighting, which I'm not sure is necessarily consistent behavior. When trades are done, they're done. If we've got the allocations, they should be sent in. There's no reason why firms should be waiting till after the market closes at 4 o'clock. Even though the amount of volume and transactions that happen at 4 doesn't mean everything else that happened during the day needs to wait. I think the other thing about affirming trades and getting to CTM and other platforms, again, it's on behalf of the entire ecosystem to make this work. It's not really one side or the other side. You've got to recognize the dependencies between both parties. So while T1 is going to go effective May 28th, there's no reason why these behaviors and these timing changes shouldn't be happening now. If you're a sell side firm, you should be talking to your buy side and say, we expect this information. If you're the buy side firm, you need to understand you need to get this information to your executing brokers on time. That's the only way this is going to work. And if you read through the SEC rule 15C6-2, now requires the broker dealers to monitor allocation times and affirmation rates. And those are really critical that, in essence, the SEC and FINRA will be looking at, the behavior, if you will, of and the operations of the entire ecosystem. And really, they're driving towards 100% affirmations. Now, one would agree or understand in the real world, just because you affirm a trade doesn't mean that it actually settles. And just because you didn't affirm a trade didn't mean it didn't settle. I think you'll look at the economics, you'll look at the pricing, you'll look at the capital that you are be required to put up against this. My view is, when do you have hands on keyboards? When are you calling your counterparty to look for a piece of information, chase them down, sending them an email? And when are you on the other side of that receiving emails? To me, that's where the friction is in the settlement processes, and why we may have a challenge. And why everybody needs to be on board to understand their role and their expectation. If anybody else wants to add to that.
Yeah, hi, Bob. Yeah, my perspective is I'm completely in agreement with you. I think that there are numerous opportunities for organizations to move away from behavioral batch thinking, all right, and deadline-based thinking, to more proactive stroke online near-time thinking. And that requires a number of different avenues to be exploited, explored, enhanced from the point of view of technology, operations, and as you've said, behavior or culture, all right? Then we need to be able to mobilize all of these. And one of the things that we've been finding increasingly when we're having conversations with organizations is they're constantly saying, what technologies can I use to enhance my existing human bench, all right? Can I make use of AI technologies to actually pre-notify or warn my internal operations staff that there is a potential bottleneck, there is a delay, or to actually smooth those out by actually smart routing information to high-performing desks who specialize in particular problem spots. So I think that there's ample opportunity for an incredible confluence of technology, operations, disruptive thinking, disruptive behaviors, and disruptive technologies.
Thanks, Vincent. I think you nailed a couple key pieces here. One is, right, you still have a broad ecosystem. I don't mean this, and I mean this in a very general way, which is heavily batch cycle dependent. They don't live on real-time data, and you don't have real-time information flowing around, nor do we have the workflows and workflow tracking systems. Basically, we're heavily dependent still on using email as a transport mechanism and shared email boxes and hence hands-on keyboards. So I think really relevant. Maybe there's a couple points it's worth just touching upon, and you folks can join in here, right? So we talk about, two issues on the shortened settlement cycle. One is FX. So through numerous conversations, and I mean many, many conversations in industry level, the mechanics are there. In fact, if you think about T1, and pretty much any settlement cycle you want is out there. T0, T1, 2, 3, 4. It's really sort of what's regular way. I think the issue that we see right this minute with FX is timing, and T2 is still regular way, it's not T1. So people need to operationally be aware of those spot trades, those paid trades that are being made for payment, need to consciously be made for T1, and really work within those windows. So I think the mechanics are there. It is a topic that we continue to work through at the industry level. So stay, tuned to any other developing best practices and time. There are conversations going on with CLS about potentially changing some of those windows. So I think just be aware as we continue to work through a handful of open issues that exist out there. So maybe just tee up this next data point on the screen here. How will T1 impact those relationships between, the buy side, sell side firms, their custodians, brokers, IT providers? So, perhaps, Tim, you can just start the lead on this and share your views.
Sure. It's kind of what I was saying a bit before, I think it's going to be becoming more of there has to be a lot of give and take on both sides. A lot of things aren't going to change on our side. One thing I also wanted to clarify when we're talking, I completely agree, trying to get that stuff out sooner is better. The way our firm works, we're trading all day long, and we could be adding to our position. So we might start trading a name at 9 in the morning, but that name could get traded all the way up to 3 o'clock. And so that is why our process is to match everything up after 3 o'clock, so that we're not, incrementing more ticket charges, having multiple trades for the same name with the same brokers with the same custodian. So it kind of ties our hands to not be able to be getting into that stuff till 3 o'clock. But one of the going on to one of the first things we were talking about, as Vincent was talking about the silos, I agree. The silos, in certain cases, silos are not going to be eliminated, but internally they might be. There's the old holy grail of a front to back office system. Instead of an OMS, an EMS, an accounting system, your performance system, maybe get it all in one shop. We've been investigating and researching. I know a lot of different people have been trying to do this for a long time. And one of the things that we've been keeping an eye on, and we've been looking at different names and different vendors out there to see who might have the opportunity to come up with a successful front to back, that could help slow or speed up everything internally so that you get things out externally faster. Because as I keep reiterating, the best process is going to be the ones that get the trade information into the hands of the brokers and the custodians as soon as possible.
I think following on from what Tim said, I'm very much in agreement. It's something that's been, front and center in my mindset. I think that when you look at, yes, you have got the silos front, middle, and back, but then actually when you look at the back office, there are sub-silos within the back office, all right? And that's one of the core focus areas for me as global head of product, and actually for what we do with many of our organizations. But I think when I look at this question, which is how do we impact the relationship? I think that because of the regulatory oversight and the risk of potential fines for late behavior, I think there's going to be a real focus on service level agreements, response level agreements, response times, etc., from all of the participants. And this is very much going to, for want of a better word, flush out the weak points in the information supply chain. So I'm from my perspective, I think that there's going to be a real focus on this SLA culture, right? To really ensure that every participant, internally and externally, subscribes 100% to the availability of the information within the actionable timeframe to avoid the punishable timeframe. That's my thinking.
And I also think I agree. I think we picked up on this on the poll answers too. When you look at counterparties kind of being one of the main kind of potential issues here, with this move to T+1, kind of getting everything done by the end of T primarily for next day settlement, there's a much greater reliance on all counterparties. So kind of everyone kind of listed in the slide here, everyone's dependent on everybody else. Everyone needs to be doing their part at the right time to go ahead and move forward. And so, there's been a huge, I know we've had our firm here has had a big push on resiliency over the past few years, as every firm has, just making sure we're ready for market stress events, whatever may occur. But I think one of the questions here around, technology, we're much more interrelated. So whoever the weakest link is, we'll go ahead and kind of break that chain to go ahead and kind of have a successful settlement on next day. And so I think that's something that everyone needs to be aware of and conscious of as you're going through and thinking about, what does this change mean for North American kind of securities markets, and how will I go ahead and manage this myself from a risk perspective?
I think that's spot on, Chris. I think as these interconnectivities and again, sort of awareness of all of our roles, why it's important to make sure, especially the relationships between, buy side, sell side, or if you will, firms and their clients. This is, first of all, the analysis that needs to be done to understand the behavior of every and all of your clients. And perhaps there are clients who need some special attention, those who do not necessarily conform, or laggards, or whatever label you want to put on it. The fact of the matter is that there are those who are really on top of their game and sending in, and some who may not make it as much of a priority. Again, I think collectively, there's all kinds of analysis on the sell side firms, understanding who their client behaviors are, and having reach outs in general, communications broadly. And again, those of you who are executing with multiple broker dealers, you're probably getting very consistent messages. Again, the SEC's rule requires the broker dealers to monitor their clients for allocation times and affirmation rates. So I don't think there's any arbitrage in operational activity, but so everybody needs to be in it together. You know, Chris, I'll tee this one up to you and start this out. And we saw a couple questions on here. You know, there are some very significant business and functions, and candidly, we could lead this towards a T1, T0 view. But if we think about T1 and its impact on functions and businesses, such as securities lending, how will this disruption or these changes really affect it? And then, you know, we think about SWIFT and messaging, collateral management, right? All these things are very, very interconnected and very dependent on understanding real-time inventories and the ability to get to your clients and get that information. Can you share your thoughts on those impacts?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And thanks for bringing kind of the second lending kind of question back up. I think if you go back to that, the poll, it was 20-25% were kind of worried about that, which is very valid. And we didn't quite address that earlier. So I think, you know, this gets back to a little bit of kind of the chain here. The mechanics are there. The technology can go ahead and do a lot of this stuff. It's where we have exceptions or delays where people need to get involved, and that's where, you know, the compressed timelines will really impact operations. When you look at sec lending, I think it's more on the recall side, and you know, we've been having some discussions, and various industry groups have been having those as well. When you're doing those recalls, can you get that security back in time to go ahead and kind of execute whatever transaction you want to do, if it's a sale or just, you know, pulling it back for a vote, whatever the reasoning is, it's not so much the lending of the security. I think that's relatively automated in a lot of cases. It's the delay kind of getting that security back and what happens. So that gets to maybe a bit of kind of, we've been talking about this kind of behavioral changes. So in this new environment, is this something that you need to go ahead and kind of let your lender know? If you want something back, you let them know kind of a day ahead, if that's something that might be possible. Giving, like, this is where, you know, hours or potentially even a day earlier may have a kind of drastic impact in the ability to go ahead and kind of get these securities back. And especially in cases where, you know, reallocation may not be possible and you need to kind of wait for something to come back. Another potential solution there would be looking at kind of partial settlements. That was, you know, if you have block trades or if you have, you know, kind of sales, a piece of that may go ahead and be, let's say, actionable or executable, even if the entire kind of order is not. So, you know, understanding those, I think, nuances and how the market may react to some of these changes, I think is something that's going to be key kind of going forward. Whether that's a true disruption, I'm not sure. I just think everyone's expecting everything faster. You know, you look at just the impatience that we have with, you know, cell phones that don't connect in a couple seconds. You know, we're all surprised, not realizing that we have, you know, little kind of supercomputers in our hands that can contact the other side of the planet. So, you know, things that were not even thought of, you know, 30 years ago are now kind of commonplace and expected. And so I think that's happening. And when you look at potentially the transition to, maybe I'll start the discussion a little bit, kind of the transition to T0, that's where I think that kind of infrastructure, I think it's more of a uprooting and a changing of the paradigm. A lot of the same mechanics may be in place kind of in a T0 format and T0 environment, but I'm not sure we need maybe everything that we have right now and maybe in the exact same way. And so for me, I think it's more of a re-engineering. If we're looking at trading on a global basis, you know, kind of what does it mean? Honestly, we still have issues with T0 and kind of, is it T0 end of day? Is it kind of, are you looking at atomic settlement and kind of having money moving back and forth? I think, you know, when you look at some of the numbers that, you know, kind of CLS puts together and DTCC, there's massive benefit in netting and to almost all participants. And so I think there's a reason to kind of keep that around, but what form would that take going forward? And that's where I think that the disruption piece, I think, requires more of a rethinking as opposed to potentially get this done in the next 2 years. I'm not sure that the time limited approach would be the best way to handle this.
Well, I think, Chris, maybe I'll just sort of pile on that last sort of statement. I think you really need to understand the overall benefits versus the risks and the changes that need to take place in order to move to a T0. I think it's not just a technology sort of issue, as we can see now, right? With the move of changing from T1, right? The point of net settlements, securities lending, things that just take time. I'll go to the risk management side of it as well. I mean, when a trade is done. So in the T1 world, we have the ability for surveillance and monitoring and nefarious behavior and there's controls that are intercede and interrupt those things as needed. In a T0 world, right, we don't have that same kind of protections. And if a trade's gone and settlement's made, it's very interesting, in the, everybody uses Amazon as sort of the poster child. Hey, why not? I can get it delivered today. Well, by the way, when you make that purchase online, you've confirmed your settlement instructions, somebody's covered your payment, and you actually have a 33% return rate. I don't think that really works in the securities world. So I think there's a lot that needs to take place. And to your point, Chris, I don't think you should worry about time. It's when is the industry as a whole. Remember, you've got to think about the industry as a whole. And it may be in certain segments. Again, you already settled T0 today in some assets or some transactions. So it's not that it's not doable, but to settle regular way has greater implications.
Yeah, and I think it's a great segue. And I think, looking at the trade-offs right now, so I would say we're swapping settlement risk for operational risk and, increasing some of the friction in other places or, realizing where the sand kind of is in the gears. And if we move to T0, you're right, kind of what other pieces would we kind of put in? Is it really a 33% return rate for Amazon?
I think all internet transactions is something like 33%.
Wow. All right. Yeah, I'm not sure that would fly in the securities market. So
yeah. I don't know, Tim, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I agree with the 33% probably wouldn't fly. But the T+0, like I said, well, on the poll that just came out, it's not shocking that all of the above is the highest, but I really think it is behavioral change. A couple of things that was brought up, Chris and Vincent both were talking about the SLAs is, fully communication is key. Coming from the buy side, sometimes we kind of like, hey, we did what we're supposed to do. Our hands are done. It's now in your hands, guys, brokers, custodians, and whatnot. We can't have that mentality. We need to know exactly what our counterparties, our partners need and at what time they need it. And then we have to provide it to them. That's part of it. With the T+0, we started trading in Hong Kong Stock Connect. It opened in November of 2014. We traded that first week in that market, and we are heavy players in that market. That's a T+0 market. We have a team that I have, a trade support team that there's 2 people working regular US hours. There's another person who comes in at noon and works until 9 p.m. And then we have another person who's actually located in Prague who works from 10 p.m. Chicago time until 8 in the morning. That person is settling those Stock Connect trades as we do them. They have to. It's the only way we can do it. India switched to T+1 recently, which is the reverse of what the international countries are going to have to deal with the U.S. change. We had to change our process that we are matching Indian trades by 6 a.m. on the day of the trade. So any trades we did last night in India, we matched at 6 a.m. this morning. That's a new process that wasn't in place a year ago. We have to have those matched so that the SWIFT messages are sent out, that the FX spot is being sent to the custodian so those trades could settle. With so many U.S. holidays on Mondays, we again had to change the process. This is all behavioral changes. We have to make sure that, for example, Saudi Arabia is a Sunday, or Egypt, I think Saudi Arabia is, as well, is a Sunday to Thursday market. When you have a holiday in America on Monday, those trades aren't going to settle. You have to change your process. So it's the technologies that there is going to have to change drastically with T+0 versus T+1. T+1, again, it's all about getting our counterparties the information as soon as possible. But when we start talking about T+0, you're talking about major changes that are going to affect behavioral changes as well as technology. You're going to have shift changes. You're going to have follow the sun process. Otherwise, I don't see how it could work.
Well, what do we?
I agree. Sorry, one of the things that I've been finding when we discuss behavioral, I think that there is an increasing tone of curiosity leaking into organizations where they actually say, if we could get that information from location A or from system A or from whatever, right, silo A, what would that mean? And they're the conversations that we're having now about connecting reconciliations with collateral to drive, the fails management problem. How do we connect up cash and liquidity? So we've actually got a feed where we're using reconciliations data around payments, et cetera, to then match that and say, well, how do I drive, optimization in my collateral, my inventory management? How do I manage that in my cash and liquidity from a real-time cash and liquidity? How do I then bring in information from corporate actions and asset servicing so that I have actually got this flow of information running around? And that is all because if you have got that level of interconnectivity, people become curious about doing things better and much more optimally.
So Vincent, this sort of goes right in the question that we've set up here, I think is right in line with what you're starting to talk about, right? Is, does T1 really require, or T0 require this overall, overhaul, if you will? I think we've already seen, I'll give you, Bob Wally's private, personal 2 cents on this is I'm underwhelmed with the broad adoption of newer technologies and new solutions. When we started this up a couple of years ago, we had a long runway and we really saw, I think, a big opportunity to take the friction out of the settlement systems. I'm personally a little bit underwhelmed by the overall general advance of this. However, and I'll put the shameless plug in here for SmartStream, as they're your sponsor here, but I think tools like SmartStream and others that are out there that create enterprise-wide data mechanisms to move it around in real-time information flow and real-time tracking and workflows enable this. And I think it is a process by process change and adoption over the ecosystem than sort of the big bang approach that there's a silver bullet to this. To me, it's process by process, function by function, data set by data set. No, Vincent, your view on that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The general uptake in the industry has been almost like a multidimensional approach, in that what has tended to happen is they have an enterprise problem that they solve on a use case by use case, all right, way, which is to try to chip it away. But the problem with solving for a use case means you can't industrialize it. You can't roll it out across the enterprise. So many organizations paint themselves into a corner by saying, well, we're going to solve for this really discrete little use case, and we're going to build a specific solution for that, and that kind of has got a degree of rigidity to it that then doesn't scale, and it creates a lot of frustration and almost a feeling of failure that they haven't been able to do this with the level of success that they want. And we are finding that the approach needs to be think enterprise, be able to deliver that with the flexibility and the scalability, and be able to go and solve discrete use cases, but with an enterprise mindset, so that you are constantly looking at how do I solve for T0 as my future state, rather than painting myself into how do I solve for a T1 technology, operations, and behavior. I've got to create a T0 end state capability so that the organization can migrate and almost like diffuse itself operationally and behaviorally into a T+1, a T0 efficient, optimized organization.
Thank you, Vincent. So I think that as we start to come towards the end of our presentations here, I think it behooves us to think about, what is the end game? Is T0 the end game? Are there process improvements? Is T1 just a stopping point? I think there's many different opinions, especially that of our chairman at the SEC. But I think as we started to touch upon some of these, do we see T1 as that opportunity to get to T0? Maybe we just sort of open this up and Tim, maybe you could just kick us off, and I'm sure we all have an opinion on this.
Sure. No, I think it's a great question, and T+1 is definitely a different question than the T+0. And I'm just a simple ops guy. I started in 1989 when I was 20 years old, and fell into the job because of a friend of a mom, and all I wanted to do was make a little extra cash so I could follow the Grateful Dead around. So it was not my role, but it was T+5. I was using Easy Time. If anybody remembers Easy Time, I would print out the sheets of paper and I would slice them because they'd only take up a half a page. We've come a long way from T+5. The big move to T+3, and then going to T+2, and now going to T+1. I from an ops point of view, we're going to do whatever we're told to do. But I want to know, what are the efficiency? What is the need for a T+0? What is going to be the goal for it? Because is it really worth the major overhaul that it will be? Could T+1 be the final line? Because it's an incredible improvement over what we've done in the last 30 years. What is the need for a T+0 would be more the question for me, because maybe our friend at the SEC, he's not an ops guy. We need to find out, and I think the voices need to be heard. Is it worth making that move? What are going to be the repercussions of going to T+0? Is it a doable thing or not? Which might not answer the question, but that's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Tim. Madam Chris, what do you think?
I think that's a great approach. What problem does it solve? You can probably kind of think about that, across a number of different areas and kind of issues that might be coming up right now. I think the challenge. I think, honestly, let's get through the next few years. With the U.S. moving to T+1 next year, U.S. And maybe answering some of these questions. Canada has indicated they're planning on moving ahead, and Mexico, the securities associations of Mexico have indicated they're moving ahead, but the regulators haven't confirmed that yet. When you look at Europe and the UK markets, UK is releasing a report due, let's say, by year end. Mm-hmm. EU is kind of following on the heels. The EU is also, I think, dealing with some stuff with CSDR right now around trying to go ahead and kind of reduce fails. The timings and the reality will be that we will have kind of different settlement regimes on different continents for the foreseeable future. I think the U.S. followed the Europe 2 years, I think, last time around. Yeah. And so this time, I'm not sure if Europe can go ahead and kind of, just with their kind of market structure, if they'll be able to go ahead and kind of make that change in that time frame and have that set up by 2026. So we might be looking at kind of a broader move there. And then there's a question of, will the UK kind of wait for the EU? Will they do see benefit moving ahead, or potentially moving ahead with certain, instruments or asset classes and not kind of moving forward with others, where there may be a bit more of an impact. So, I think for me, that's let's deal with some of these questions first, and hopefully we're not creating more problems as we go through and kind of make these kind of rule changes, and kind of putting in. I think we have 5 minutes left, so putting in a plug for what started this in the first place. There's a movie that just came out called Dumb Money, which talks about kind of the meme stock, issues and kind of what happened. And I haven't seen it, so I don't know to what extent they kind of get into the specific issue that brought this up with kind of into the under the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But it was that's something that happened 2.5 years ago, and kind of it's interesting that Hollywood made a movie before we're implementing the change. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are out there, kind of, and let's understand kind of what the issue is before we move forward. So
I think Chris, you sort of hit an interesting point on that movie. I think one thing is the system actually worked, and I think that's what's important to know. Right? Margin was called. I think the parties were unprepared because of their sort of experience with it, and it was a sort of a new paradigm, considering Reddit and how it all sort of happened. My personal belief is just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think, Tim, you pinpointed it before, the challenges of de-risking settlement risk for that trade-off of operational risk. We have no fallback, right? We have a happy path today that says, I'm going to get through the night. But if you have a 2-hour outage and you have 1,000 manual trades that you need to enter into the system, is your staff going to be available? I mean, let's be real. We send files all over the place through our own systems, let alone coordinating with the industry. Hence, I think, Vincent, some of your points on, consistent data and real-time data that's flowing. The fact of the matter is we've got a lot of technical debt that's very historical that's out there. And I think to the point of, it's going to take us, and maybe here's just some parting words and let you guys chime in on this. So we have 230 X days to get there. Everybody should be testing their systems with DTCC, as they've got a full, robust test cycles in place. I think 28 testing cycles. If you've got vendors, you need to understand who the vendors are and what their T1 implications are and what their change is going to be. Reach out to your clients. And very candidly, I think you need all hands on deck. I think there was a question in here on operations staff. I think there are moves to move folks to the West Coast, those to follow the Sun models and or to shift. I've got a client who's standing up a second shift. The good thing is that they can work from home because we're all used to that. But I think it's going to be all hands on deck, and I think it's going to take 2 to 3 or 4 months to adopt to these new timings. And, we may see some upticks in settlement fails, and people need to be prepared for how to handle that and have funding on hand, et cetera. So sort of those are my parting words. Maybe I'll just hit you up, Chris, and then Tim, and then turn it over to Vincent.
Yeah, I think from my end, I'll just maybe reiterate quickly what I said earlier around, understand your firm, understand your risk appetite, understand, everyone on the call, everyone knows kind of, what the business is, what they're trading. The impacts, I think, are probably different enough per firm that it makes sense for you to kind of best understand kind of, what are the impacts to you from a market perspective, and also what are the impacts from maybe just getting kind of quickly back to that counterparty perspective. Your counterparties are the ones that are going to support you kind of throughout this, whether it's your broker dealer, custodian, potentially somebody on the FX side providing some funding. So, understand that ecosystem that we all live in, that we all kind of take for granted right now. How is that going to change? How is that going to get stressed? And make sure that you're addressing those stress points.
Yeah, I agree completely. And as I said before, it's communication. We trade through 120 different brokers. That's on our broker list. And we have, which is insane, but I have no control over that. But we have, as you guys said, I have 200 plus days to talk with each one of them and make sure that we're out. Right now, this has been a great reminder. I need to start talking to these guys, make sure I know what they need from us. We can't be at 4 o'clock and they're gone for the day. We need to understand exactly what our partners in this. It can't be an us versus them, which sometimes is the case in back offices, in the front office versus buy side versus sell side. We can't have the us versus them. We got to be partners in this, because the bottom line is we're trying to settle these trades for our clients. And if we are losing, fines or losing money to trades not settling, if we're having, issues like that, the bottom line is going to affect our funds, and we can't have that happen. So we got to work on it together, communicate, find out what everybody needs from each other, and make sure that we provide it on those timely basis.
I couldn't agree more with every single one of you. I think that we're at a nexus point in terms of organizations having an opportunity and a driver to learn more about their operational technology and counterparty or participant DNA, to be able to understand where the operational and technology frictions are, and to actually solve those elegantly to have a better outcome than just lurching to compliance. I think that this is a watermark, and it's an opportunity for us all to come together to actually have a better outcome by eliminating the frictions. And they all exist, but nobody truly knows where they lie and why they are. But we can solve them.
Well, thank you, everybody. Back to you, Maureen.
Thanks, Bob. Yes, thanks to our panel today. I know there's a lot going on here behind the scenes and a lot to cover. So thank you, Bob, for moderating. And thank you, Chris and Vincent and Tim for participating and all the time you put in for the prep. We also want to thank SmartStream for sponsoring, because without them, these types of conversations are not possible. And then lastly, we want to thank all the attendees for coming today. We have a lot of you on the call. We know that there are a lot of things that you are all working on, so we appreciate you taking the time to join our call. This has been recorded, so you can go back and listen to it or share it with a colleague. I know there was a lot of information that was presented. We tried to work in some of the responses to your questions, but I know there are a lot that we weren't able to get to. The attendee, the speaker contact info is on your event platform, so feel free to reach out to our panelists or to us to help direct any of your specific questions. We are here to help, and we hope that you have much success on your T+1 or T+0 journey. And we hope to see you on another webinar or at another event soon. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.